in association with SCPWI on the website and in the promotional material. So I'll just quickly explain what that is for those who don't know. It's an international organization. We have an India chapter that's really active, and we do a lot of events in Bangalore. It's called Writers and Illustrators, but membership is open to anyone who's passionate about children's literature, musicians, artists, filmmakers, teachers, especially librarians. So we welcome everyone, anyone who's interested in children's books. We organize workshops and sessions to do with children's books. We meet every 2-3 months to just hang out and talk about what we're doing, what we're reading, writing, working on, whatever. So you can come talk to me after the discussion to find out more about it. scpwindia.wordpress.com is where you'll find information about upcoming events. Many of those are open to non-members as well. So quickly diving into the discussion. So Katie, I'll start with you. What do you think publishers and agents are looking for when it's a story that's set in Africa or Latin America? What excites them?
One of the most important things in writing a book based in any country is to get beyond its borders to a universal truth. So in all of my books, this one, for example, is set in a refugee camp in Tanzania, but it deals with the issue of bullying and how do you face down bullies and how do you build trust and inclusion because it's through a soccer team actually in the camp. And that's a universal. That could be any playground in the world. This other one that was mentioned earlier, One Hen, is based in Ghana, and it's based on the true story of a little boy who got a small loan, bought a chicken, and rose to become the largest poultry farmer in Ghana. And it teaches kids anywhere that you can rent money and create value and be responsible and pay it back and grow things that help yourself, your family, your community, and even your country. So these kinds of universals, I think, are the important thing to embed as you localize any story.
Thank you, Katie. And Shobha, Karadi Tales has been a regular at different countries. So could you share, based on your experience there and the reactions that you've seen to those books that have sold rights, which are the titles that work? What kind of stories are accepted across?
So there's actually no clear formula to this. I wish there was. Then we would all be writing books and making books that traveled globally really quickly. But each time we make a book, of course, for me, primarily, I don't look to the market to see, to either commission a book or when I illustrate it. I should like the story and I should think there's a readership for it. I really don't look to see whether it has a global market for it. In fact, sometimes, of course, we've sold our books to even countries like Korea and Japan and Malaysia and Indonesia and France and Germany and Spain. But each of the markets, it's not like one book has traveled to all these markets, that each of the markets has chosen a different book from our catalog. So it's also each country's preferences for the art and the story. But with the picture book, I think one very fundamental thing that other publishers look for is the art. That the story is secondary, that the art must be really strong and powerful, and it has to be a good juxtaposition of the text with the art, with the illustration. And these are the kinds of stories that move. I mean, but it's also not happened when we think that we put out a great book and there's going to be a queue of people lining up for the book, but that's not happened. And some books take us by surprise, that even though, of course, we love all our books, they're all our babies, but we think, well, maybe I don't think this will, but we still take the book and we still put it up in the stand in Bologna, and then there'll be publishers and we'll be showing them all these beautiful books and they'll say, can we see that book? And then it would be that particular year that we have so many people asking for the rights of that book. So really, there's no clear formula. But I think that art, I can see that very clearly, that they like sophisticated art to a certain extent of sophistication. The books that travel globally don't have art that is cartoonish or like the animated work. People don't like digital art. They like hand-drawn traditional coloring, which works. I mean, these are for sure. And then it depends on what the illustrator or the artist brings to the story, you know. And that the pictures tell a completely independent story than what the text does, you know. It's not just merely supportive of the text. You can discover a little bit more with the illustrations.
The illustrator added her cat on every page. It was hidden and then it was coming out. And I mean, there was no cat in the story at all, but there turned out to be a second plot line of this cat that ends up with a resolution as well. And she just threw it in and it made it so much fun for the kids. So I completely agree with you.
And that's the fun of picture books, isn't it? Yeah. So what do you think makes a book find readers across the world in different continents? And is that something that you are conscious of when you're writing or even earlier when you're planning the book itself?
Sure. No, I don't think so. I really never imagined the Night Diary, especially because that's the book that sort of had the most global reach of mine. I never really imagined. I hoped that there would be, you know, one of the reasons that I wrote the Night Diary, it's about partition, and I grew up in Connecticut, outside of near New York City, and my father was in partition, and I grew up hearing stories about it, but nobody else around me knew anything about this huge piece of global history. So I didn't know I'd grow up and become a writer, but when I did, I felt like I really wanted to shape a story around this time, if I could, to just sort of spread the knowledge of this important history. And then, of course, I hoped it would connect with India, right? How could it not? As I was trying to connect with my own family history. But the fact is, you know, like right now it's out in Brazil and it's being translated into Spanish and Chinese and French. And so that's in some ways the biggest surprise. But I really was just thinking, how can I tell this specific story about this girl having to leave her home as well as I can? And it really, anything that happens afterwards, after you write a book, in some ways is just luck, an accident, you know, if it resonates with people. So I don't really think about that as I'm writing.
See, I'm not sure about the genre of chapter books and young adult because I don't really deal with that. But certainly in picture books, of course we have it. I mean, the proof of the pudding is in the fact that books have traveled, and not just from Curry Details. We have several publishers, children's publishers, whose books have traveled. And so we definitely have what it takes, but we probably need to hone that better. I find one of the most challenging things, at least for us, in India, we don't have, and I think Priya might agree with me, that we don't have courses that offer just children's illustration. And this is a tragedy, really, because we have courses that offer fine art and digital art and graphic art, but there is a skill and there is a study to learn children's book illustrations. And we just try to see the books that are successful and try to borrow from that, but we ourselves don't have the skill. Our illustrators don't have it. So many of the times we would give a manuscript to an illustrator, but it is the publisher who's directing how the illustrations need to be done. Where I mean, we actually would like the illustrator to tell us, you know, what the layout should be or what the perspectives should be. But this is not a training that illustrators in India have. And I think if we have an academy that trains illustrators for children's book illustrations, I think we'd really see leaps and bounds in the quality of illustrations that we produce. Yeah, it's not that we lack in the skill; we just need some training. Yeah.
I hope someone's listening. Veera, with your writing so beautifully, I've been reading the Night Diary, and the food, the descriptions of the work going on in the kitchen, Kazi is hand pounding coriander seeds, and the kids are eating sugarcane in the field. So it's just done so beautifully. There's enough that you're doing to add the local flavor, but you're not losing the reader by overwhelming him or her with details. So how would you do that? I'd love to hear from you on the process and how you go about making that happen.
And the story I'm trying to tell, and sort of what fills up their world and their life as specifically as possible. So I'm always trying to think, well, what would this family eat? What would this family do? Where are they located? What's, sort of around in the setting and the history? And so I wanted to just, asking, my father what he remembers eating for breakfast and what the house looked like, and all these things that I wouldn't know because I didn't grow up in 1947 in Mir Prakash. So just getting as specific details as I can. And then it's just really, as a writer, you're always balancing that. How much sensory detail do you put in? How much sort of local detail do you need to make your setting real? So I think with no matter where you're writing about, you're making those choices. And then part of it's just instinct and balancing,
So we'll do one last couple of questions more, and then we'll open questions from the audience. So if you have something to ask, please be ready. The mic, I think, will come around. Katie, coming back to you. You write, your stories are set in rural Ghana, in the Honduran islands. So what makes your stories authentic? Is it lived experience? Is it travel? Is it research? Or something else? A combination of these? What is it?
And I write about characters that I've met, sometimes not deeply, sometimes I've met them briefly and I've researched their background, but I try to be authentic in that it's out of my own experience. And then I also try to write about themes I've worked in. I was an international aid worker for a decade, and that's why I've worked in so many countries. And so I've worked in food security. I have a book that's set in the Honduras, part of the Isthmus of Central America, called what was it called? Oh, The Human Farm. I wrote it 20 years ago. It's still in print. It's funny. But it's the whole story of sustainable development throughout Honduras and Central America. And there's this one little snippet in the book about a rural school teacher who helped teach children math and science through creating a community garden or a school garden, and they actually learned organic agriculture and sustainable agriculture as they were learning their school subjects. Well, these kids took that home and helped improve their family farm. So that little few paragraphs in an adult book, then I spun out and it became a full children's book. But again, based, because I did so much research for the adult book, based on a real family that had learned these techniques with that teacher, etc. So it's that kind of thing. I have to say, a great pleasure of mine when I'm writing, I was listening briefly to the earlier panel, which said writing is a solitary affair. But for me, it doesn't feel that way because I hear the voices of people I've worked with in my head as I write the characters, because these characters are usually coming out of some real conversations and real relationships.
Should we try and make our stories appeal globally, or should we just focus on the local, or should we keep both aspects in my mind, in our minds when we go about it?
I'm not sure about it. If I publish a story in India, I want the children in India to be able to read it and relate to it and like it first. And then, if it has the potential, through the work of art that we do, for the story to travel, because they are picture books, I'm delighted by that. We, at this point, I'd just like to mention there's a series of books which are based on a farmer in India, and it's called Farmer Falgu, and he either goes on a trip or he goes to the market, he goes to the Kumbh Mela, or he goes kite flying, which are all very Indian things, and he's a dark-skinned farmer. He wears a turban and a dhoti, and the story was a wonderful story written by one of our authors, Chitra Saundar, and the illustrations were so different and so unique and so fabulous. But I wasn't sure about the appeal that the book would have in the West. And I remember a German publisher who looked at it and said, I mean, it's a great story, but I don't see the children in Germany relating to it. But at the same time, there was another German publisher who picked it up and did many languages with it. But the book was so successful. It was the story and it was the art, and it couldn't get more Indian than it was, you know, with the farmer riding the bullock cart and, you know, and everything was, the illustrations all reflected an Indian scenario or an environment. And we've sold it in 8 languages now. And so if you ask me what's the mystery of the farmer having traveled to so many countries, I would say it was such a good marriage of the art and the text, you know. So it just happened organically, and it wasn't meant to appeal to a global market, but I really loved the story. And
can I add, it's refreshing to hear that.
Yes.
I work for Canada's, and they had a realization, I would say, well, I started writing for them 20 years ago, but certainly by 10 years ago, they had, because children's books is, it's a market that has a lot of pressure on it, you know, cost pressure and such. They realized it was much easier for them to calculate sales of a book that would go to libraries and schools, ergo nonfiction. And so nonfiction that connected to certain subjects. So as an author within their stable, I know my books have to have a theme that is literacy or food security or, you know, something related to social emotional learning. So it needs to have that. And then it's a plus if it is based on a true story, which is just how I happen to do my books. But we don't seem to have as much freedom to roam.
Well, I think in the U.S., a good push for just more diverse voices and more diverse stories. I think that U.S. publishing has a lot of work to do in that area. So I was just really pleased that, you know, when I said to my agent, you know, I want to write a middle grade novel about a girl having to leave her home during the partition, you know, that she was open to it. And then when we sent it out to editors, there were a lot of editors who were really excited about it. And, you know, I think that the landscape is changing in the U.S. of just being more open to all kinds of stories all around the world. And some of my writing is contemporary and more local to where I live. So I've kind of done both. But I would love to just see that moving forward. You know, when you were saying, you know, oh, this book, you know, is too Indian or too whatever. A good story is a good story, and it should connect us all globally and provide just more empathy and just be able to relate to people all over the world. So I just hope that continues to grow.
But can I ask if you think the fact it dealt with a refugee issue was particularly pertinent in this moment?
Certainly, I think that, you know, I wanted to write this story. As I was writing, it started to resonate with themes, more modern themes than I even expected. So that wasn't necessarily my purpose. So things connect in different ways that you can't know or control. Yeah.
But just for me to add, what we did do with all our books, which we've started distributing them in North America, both in the US and Canada. And we've got really fabulous reviews from Kirkus and School Library Journal and the Huffington Post and all of these places where the people who review the books are just looking at it like completely void of any other baggage that might be, and looking at the story for just what it is. And the books have started doing now really well in North America, for which, so the books have gone, well, not global, they've just definitely gone to North America, yeah. Many of our books, yeah.
I think that dovetails with the fact that children are getting news from all over the world at a much earlier age, and they know about countries, and the more we can introduce them to countries that are in the news, that's a huge plus. It's also, I have found working with schools, I work a lot in urban areas, underprivileged areas, and that setting a story in Ghana or Honduras or Kenya is actually safe space to discuss issues of poverty anywhere. So it's sometimes easier for children in urban America to talk about the issues because they're set in another country. But it's the same issue. I mean, as I said, they're universal truths, and I would imagine that could be true in any country.
That's true.
So, any questions from the audience? Yeah.
So I have two questions. One is, as all of your authors here, so I'd like to ask, what do you think defines a local book? Is it the intention of the author, whether they want to target a specific place, or is it the reach of the book that it ends up having at a certain point of time?
Who wants to take that?
You said what defines a global book?
A local book.
A local book. I mean, I think a local book, you know, I don't really consider The Night Diary a local book from where I am because I was writing about another place and time. So I would think what defines a local book is writing about, you know, where you are, where the author is at that moment. But I don't know. You could have...
Yeah, I might amend, well, my definition would be a localization tale. So we heard about how Veera talked about crushing cardamom and things like that. I mean, that's the be able to smell the smells, see the sights, imagine the characters in their local setting. But the theme, and I think most of our themes tend to be universal, and that's what makes them global books.
Then my second question is, when I go back and draw it, so do you think that people globally are actually looking more at the text and art relationship, or just the two separate storylines that are there?
I think, yeah, I mean, how old are you, darling? There are different publishers who look at different things. Some look at this juxtaposition, some look like if I have to sell the rights of a book to the United States, for instance, they will look at the text. The text can be, the storyline can be a little weak. So it depends which country wants it and what they're looking at. I try as a publisher to maintain a good balance between the text and the illustrations. It's very, very difficult. It doesn't always happen. Some books, it happens beautifully and magically. Some books we really struggle, but I'm not going to tell which ones they are. And some books we don't even achieve it, you know, sometimes. We don't even make the balance. But that's how it is, yeah.
Thank you.
Definitely different than, yeah, I mean, it's not that hard to publish local books to a global level. But let's say, since India is a land of so many people, there are also so many different problems and in so many different contexts. So how would you say that one local book is local to India when India itself is so diverse?
And it is so local to a husband and wife, an old man and woman who live in the interiors of Tamil Nadu. And the illustration shows them as these short, dark-skinned people with a big bindi and the sari worn in a different way. So what we do for such things is we use storytellers like Janaki, who will take the story which is so southern or so Tamil, and in their telling will make it universal. Maybe not through the books alone, but in their telling. Is idli now not traveled across India?
It is.
Of course it has. In Kashmir you can eat idlis. Yeah. It's the same thing with the stories. It's not, if food can travel, so can the stories. Yeah.